Good morning, everyone. Welcome to City Hall Council Chambers for this morning's council meeting, July the 12th, 2016. Welcome back, everybody. We are going to start our meeting with a roll call, please, from our clerks.
Okay. Mayor Robertson's in the chair. Councillor Louie. Councillor Stevenson has a leave of absence. Councillor Deal. Councillor Jang. Councillor Reimer. Councillor Meigs. Councillor Ball. Councillor Carr. Councillor Affleck and Councillor DeGenova. Mr. Mayor, we have a quorum.
Thank you very much, Madam Clerk, and welcome again, everybody. We're going to start with in-camera. Council is required to meet in camera later this week. The reasons and authority under the Vancouver Charter are listed in the agenda. Someone move that motion. Councillor Louie will move. Councillor Deal will second. Any discussion? All those in favor? Any opposed? That carries. Before we dive into our next item of business, I wanted to express some condolences this morning for Rick Gates, who was a longtime leader of Local 15 here at the city, who passed away on Saturday, July the 2nd of this year. Rick retired some years ago in 2005 from the city of Vancouver after 35 years of service. He started at the city when he was 20 years old as a rodman, working with city surveyors. He progressed in his city career and eventually became a social planner, where he oversaw many files, including management of the city's social grants for many years. Rick was a great advocate for neighborhood houses, was instrumental in the development of Kawasa, Collingwood, and Mount Pleasant neighborhood houses. He was also very much involved in his with the local union, the Union Local, first with the Vancouver Municipal and Regional Employees Union, the VMREU, and then with QP15 after the 1995 merger. And he served as president of the union on more than one occasion. Upon retirement, Rick and his partner Jane moved to the district of Souk on Vancouver Island, where he enjoyed gardening, getting involved in local community activities there, and lived out a great decade on the South Island, and was very much appreciated by his colleagues and community groups that he served there. But we just wanted to express to Rick's family and friends, everyone who worked with him here at the city, our thoughts and prayers and condolences on Rick's passing, as someone who gave a lot to our city and everyone who worked here. Remembering Rick. So we will move on to the business of the day, and the first up is our minutes from our past cycle of meetings. First, from a regular council meeting of June the 28th, 2016. Any corrections to the council minutes? Moved and seconded. Any debate? All those in favor? Any opposed? That carries. Minutes 2 are from the regular council meeting that's followed the Standing Committee on Policy and Strategic Priorities, June the 29th, 2016. Any corrections? Moved and seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor of adoption? Any opposed? That carries unanimously. So our minutes are all set, and we have a consent agenda, and that has 3 administrative reports on the agenda for consideration, and council may adopt. Actually, council first of all received a request to speak to Administrative Report 2. That's the 2016 Cultural Infrastructure Grant Allocations. If council wishes to hear the speaker, that report can be referred to the City Finance and Services meeting tomorrow, beginning at 9:30. Councillor Deal will move referral of that. Councillor Carr will second. Any opposed? All those in favor of referring that item to tomorrow to hear from speakers? Any opposed? That carries unanimously. And we have the remaining 2 motions that are on the 2 reports. We can adopt the recommendations in a single motion. Does anyone wish to hold either of these reports? Councillor Reimer?
It's A1 on the amendments to health bylaw.
Okay, we will hold A1. So I will ask now if someone will move adoption of A3. The one that is as a consent agenda, moved and seconded. And all those in favor? Any opposed? That carries unanimously. So we have adopted Administrative Report 3, that's 2016 Childcare Enhancement and Other Social Grants. That has been Recommendations have been approved. And we'll bring the first report back later in this meeting. And the second report we will see tomorrow and hear from speakers. So we are on to our first report reference, and that is on the Greenest City Action Plan Implementation Update, 2015-2016 Implementation Update. And now we're going to go to Doug Smith, who's our Acting Director of the Sustainability Group. Before Doug dives in, I just want to acknowledge some folks who are here from Empower Me. And we've got Amy Hennessy, Yasmin Abraham, Jason Chan, and Zara Zakra from Empower Me, they are an energy conservation program for new immigrants and diverse ethnic communities. Through trusted mentors in the community, they support people in their own languages in the comfort of their own homes to help them save money, save energy, and make their homes more comfortable and safe. And available in 3 South Asian languages, 3 Chinese languages, Farsi, Korean, and English, with more languages to come. The award-winning Empower Me program has reached more than 200 Vancouver homes, saved a total of $40,000 on Vancouver residents' utility bills per home, removed more than 1,200 tons of CO2 equivalent from the atmosphere since the City of Vancouver joined the program in 2015. Thank you for joining us, Empower Me, and thanks for the great partnership. We're going to hear a little more about you guys, I think, in Doug's presentation, but glad that you're here to join us for this morning's presentation on the Greenest City Action Plan Implementation Update. Mr. Doug Smith, you have the floor.
Good morning, Mayor and Council. When the Greenest City Action Plan was approved by Council in 2011, it was with a request that the city staff report back each year towards the progress towards implementation, and this is the 5th annual update on that progress. Today we're going to cover the updates made in 2015 and early in 2016 towards our 2020 targets, and we'll also highlight the details of which are highlighted in the annual implementation plan that you have in front of you at your desks there. As you recall, the Greenest City Action Plan seeks to achieve 3 broad aspirational objectives: to work towards zero carbon, zero waste, and healthy ecosystems. Each of the 10 goal areas are clustered around these three broad aspirational objectives that they most support. We'll walk through each goal area now, and we're going to highlight what we have achieved in the past year, starting with our carbon goal. The 2020 target here is to reduce greenhouse gases in the community by 1/3 when compared with the 2007 baseline. Since 2007, there has been a 15% decrease in community greenhouse gases. Vancouver has the lowest per capita greenhouse gas emissions of any major city in North America at 3.9 tons per person. This is due in part to British Columbia's abundance of renewable hydroelectricity, but it's also due in large part to government, corporate, and community actions and policies. We rank in the top 5 in the world's major cities with per capita greenhouse gas emissions. So here's a breakdown of that 15% reduction. Last year, we reported our greenhouse gas inventory from 2013 as opposed to our 2014, because we didn't have the 2014 data. Now that we have the 2014 data, we see that it was actually at 10% as opposed to the 7% you see up there. Since then, we've seen an overall reduction, an additional 5% between 2014 and 2015, and it's made up of 3 major components. The first one, which is a little bit counterintuitive, is gasoline sales. Gasoline sales actually went up in the Lower Mainland and in Vancouver between 2014 and 2015, and that's led to a 2% increase in greenhouse gases. We speculate that this may be due to vehicle choices because overall kilometers driven by residents has gone down. So it's not that people are driving more, we're driving quite a bit less here in Vancouver. But what typically happens across North America is when gasoline prices go down, people tend to buy bigger vehicles. They don't make good decisions. And what also happens is a phenomenon locally known as leakage, where when the prices go up here in the Lower Mainland, people tend to go to the United States or they go to the Fraser Valley to buy gasoline. When the prices go back down here, they come back into the Lower Mainland and into Vancouver to buy their gasoline. So that's a couple of the reasons we believe that the GHGs associated with gasoline sales have gone up. The second one is our landfill gas. We're continuing to improve our collection rates there, and that's gone down by 4% over the last year. Well, it's improved our GHG by 4%. It's actually gone down farther than that. And then the last one is just overall natural gas use. Declined in 2014 due to the overall efficiency of the city's building stock mostly, and that in combination with our warmer winters. And I'm going to discuss the warmer winter issue a little bit more detail in the next section here. So for each section, I'm going to have a number of highlights I'm going to put up there, but in the interest of time, I'm just going to talk about one of the highlight stories for each of the sections. So for the climate section, I'm going to focus on the renewable city strategy that Council approved in November 2015. This commits Vancouver to deriving 100% of its energy from renewable sources before 2050. And later this fall, we will be bringing you the implementation plan associated with this strategy. And later today, you'll see an important part of this strategy, which is the zero emissions building plan, which will be coming up after this report. The second of our Greenest City goals is to lead the world in green building construction and design. Buildings are responsible for 54% of greenhouse gas emissions in Vancouver. Our goal is to reduce carbon emissions from existing buildings by 20% over 2007 levels and to ensure that buildings built after 2020 are carbon neutral. Sean Pander will be discussing the second target in more detail in the upcoming zero emission building report. To date, we've reduced absolute GHG emissions from the Vancouver buildings by 20%, even as the city has continued to grow. As discussed in the climate section, we've got updated GHG numbers for 2014, and now instead of the 5% we reported last year, we were actually at 8%. As you can see, the industrial building sector has reduced its footprint by 2%, and the remaining building stock has decreased by 10%, leading for a total 20% reduction relative to 2007. While it appears we've met our target, it should be noted that since 2011, we've had some of the warmest winters on record. So it's possible that these numbers will be a little bit less impressive if we have a few cold winters in the next couple of years. Having said that, we have normalized this data with respect to our temperature and our weather. And when you also factor in Vancouver's growth over the last few years, we're definitely seeing that our building stock is getting more and more energy efficient every single year. This next slide relates to our 2020 carbon neutral goal. And what this is telling us is that new buildings being approved today will produce 30% less greenhouse gases than those approved in 2007. Again, Sean Pander will talk a little bit more about this in the next presentation. For our 2015 building highlights, I'm going to focus on Passive House. In 2015, the city enabled Passive House developments by removing some of the code and permitting barriers around their design and their construction. Passive houses can have up to 90% fewer emissions than traditional designs. Casa Luca was the first certified passive house in Vancouver, and that was completed early in 2016. Casa Luca is a home to a family of 4, and their average winter heating bill is below $20 a month. So passive house is not just about energy and emissions, it's also about comfort and affordability. We're also working towards zero emissions, let's try that again. We're also working towards zero carbon emissions by providing increased access to green transportation options. Transportation was responsible for 41% of greenhouse gas emissions in Vancouver in 2015. In 2014, we met our 2020 targets of 50% active transportation mode share. In 2015, we maintained that number. Of course, this doesn't mean we're going to stop pursuing this goal, as our 2040 transportation plan goal is 2/3 of trips being made by walking, biking, or transit. It appears our mode split is plateaued, and this is likely due to the lack of new transit infrastructure in the region. With more people traveling in the region every single day, if we do not add more large-scale transit soon, we may see this number heading in the other direction. Not only have we seen progress in the mode shift, but we've also seen a decrease in the distance each person travels through the city by car. Vehicle kilometers traveled by people in Vancouver has decreased 27% since 2007. As mentioned earlier, even though VKT is down, fuel sales are up, indicating people may be buying bigger vehicles. And that means we need to continue supporting people's choices in vehicles and advocating for different choices. Part of this is going to be through our electric vehicle infrastructure, and later on this fall, we'll be bringing forward an electric vehicle charging infrastructure strategy for you to approve so we can keep working forward on this goal. So some of the highlights around transportation. There was quite a few in 2015, but the one I'd really like to focus on is the Arbutus Corridor. This is an absolute once-in-a-generation opportunity to repurpose this space as an amazing community amenity. The city purchased 42 acres of land in March 2016, and will develop this into a space for walking, cycling, transit, and other public realm features. Now we're going to walk through the zero waste goal. Our goal here is to cut waste tonnage by 50% from 2008 levels. This isn't just about recycling, but about helping people make better decisions about how they purchase goods and services to reduce their overall waste in the system. Greenhouse gas emissions from waste and landfill and incineration are responsible for 5% of our community greenhouse gas emissions. Vancouver's solid waste to landfill and incinerator has decreased 23% since 2008 based on our 2014 data, which is our most up-to-date data we have there. So we're definitely on track towards our 2020 goal of 50%. Here are some of the highlights of our 2015 and 2016 waste stories, though my personal favorite is construction and demolition waste. Going forward, wood waste is expected to be the biggest generator of greenhouse gases in our landfill. In 2015, Council approved the construction and demolition waste bylaw that by 2018 will require all homes being demolished to achieve at least a 75% diversion rate. So far, 96% of the single-family demolitions that we've done that have been subject to the bylaw have complied. So we've had very high compliance with the industry. It's been very positive. The average diversion rate has been 86%, even though the requirement's only 75%. Typically, before our bylaw was put in place, we were only getting 50% diversion, so it's been a very successful bylaw. We've seen an additional 10,000 tons of waste diverted from the landfill since 2014. That's the equivalent of about 3,000 tons of CO2. We're now going to move on to the third of our three aspirational goals, to protect, preserve, and restore healthy ecosystems. Providing access to nature has meant ensuring that every resident lives within a 5-minute walk of a natural space and expanding Vancouver's urban forest by an additional 150,000 trees by 2020. We are making progress towards the goal of 150,000 trees. We're roughly a third of the way there, and we have seen an increase of about 12,000 trees over the last year. However, we're running out of space on public property, and therefore meeting this target will require many future trees to be planted on private lands. In early 2016, the Parks Board and City Council adopted a citywide biodiversity strategy, which sets a target of 25 hectares of natural space restoration and enhancement by 2020. 14 hectares have been restored or enhanced since 2010, so we are on track towards this goal. Another metric we're now tracking that was announced as part of last year's GCAP refresh is the tree canopy target. We're not just looking at the number of trees, but the quality and coverage of our urban canopy. 18% is our 2013 baseline, and there's another survey slated for 2017. We have a long-term target of 22% by 2050. This target is tied directly to our biodiversity goal, as it will enhance habitat for birds, native mammals, and other species. It will also support our climate adaptation work. These three stories are some of the examples of our access to nature work through Parks Board, but I'd like to highlight the new salt marsh in New Brighton Park. The Park Board and the Vancouver Fraser Port Authority have teamed up to develop a 2-hectare salt marsh on the eastern side of New Brighton Park. The intent there is to restore the rich intertidal zone with marsh areas, mudflats, and tidal channels. The marsh will connect the Creekway Park, created in 2014 as part of the long-term restoration of Hastings Park, long-term restoration of Hastings Creek in Hastings Park. Next up is clean water. Our clean water goal has two imperatives: to protect the quality of Vancouver's drinking water and to reduce water consumption. Vancouver residents continue to drink the cleanest tap water of any large city in the world. In 2015, our overall water consumption was down 15% from our 2006 baseline. However, this is actually an increase of 1% over last year. This number could have been much worse if not for the water restrictions that were put in place. Due to dry conditions, water use was actually on the rise in spring of 2015. It was up 12% from the same period in 2014. It wasn't until the water restrictions were in place did we see a drop in water use. To help drive long-term water reductions, Council approved a 2016 to 2020 Clean Water Work Program in November of 2015, and we expect this to show results in the coming months and coming years. For the 2015 water stories, I'm going to mention the Integrated Rainwater Management Plan. The Integrated Rainwater Management Plan was approved by Council in April 2016. What's innovative and exciting about this plan is the long-term target to capture 90% of our annual rainfall through green and natural infrastructure. This will mean cleaner local waterways, support for a biodiversity strategy, and resilience to heavier and more frequent rainfall events due to climate change. I love this photo. It's one of my favorites. Having a resilient food system is central to the sustainability of cities. Encouraging the growth of more local food reduces greenhouse gas, slows the loss of biodiversity, supports local economy, creates green jobs, and improves food security. In 2015, we saw an increase of food assets of 38% over our 2010 baseline, well on our way to our 2020 target of a 50% increase. By food assets, we mean community gardens, community kitchens, local farms, orchards, and farmers markets. The 2015-2016 highlight I'd like to mention is the Urban Farming Bylaw and Guideline. In March 2016, City Council adopted a set of urban farm guidelines and updated our bylaws with a focus on developing safe, neighborly, productive urban farms and to create more sustainable food systems for Vancouver. Currently, there are 18 urban farm businesses that are operating in Vancouver. Next up, we have clean air. The clean air goal is a good example of where other levels of government, policies, and actions have a major impact on our outcomes. Metro Vancouver has jurisdictional responsibility over air quality planning. Therefore, we're working in partnership with them to support them, mainly through electric vehicle infrastructure. In 2015, there was 3 instances of air quality exceedances. These corresponded directly with the wildfire smoke events that occurred throughout the city in the region and through the region in July 2015. We will likely see an increase in this issue due to climate change as it leads to drier summers and more wildfires. Our 2 highlights around air quality were at the provincial level this year, and my favorite was the province joining the Zero Emission Vehicle Alliance. In December 2015, at COP21, British Columbia became the 14th jurisdiction to sign on to the International Zero Emission Vehicle Alliance. Members committed to make all new passenger vehicles purchased in their jurisdictions zero-emission vehicles by 2050. Zero-emission vehicles today include battery electric, plug-in hybrids, biofuel, hydrogen fuel cell vehicles. The province will need to put significant efforts in place and put some new policies in place if they're actually going to meet their challenges to have these zero-emission vehicles 100% being purchased by 2050. There are 2 remaining goals, and these are both integral with all of the other goals across the city, our green economy and our lighter footprint goals. The Vancouver Economic Commission leads our green economy work to double the number of green jobs in the city of Vancouver by 2020. We define green jobs according to the United Nations Environment Program designation. In Vancouver, we created green jobs in multiple sectors, including high threshold jobs such as those in the clean tech sector and low threshold jobs such as those in urban agriculture for those with barriers to employment. In addition, the Vancouver Economic Commission is also working to double the number of companies that are actively greening their operations. The last green job study was done in 2013 and showed a 19% increase in the number of green jobs since 2010. We appear to be on track towards our target, and the next study is slated for 2016. We hope to have the results for you in time for this update for next year. There are a lot of great green economy stories for 2015, but the one I'd like to highlight is Globe 2016. The Globe Green Business Conference brought the world to Vancouver in February 2016, hot on the heels of Paris, the COP21 event that was held in Paris this year. For Globe 2016 in Vancouver, we had over 12,000 attendees. The Vancouver Economic Commission hosted trade delegation, investor events, company tours, and connected many of the city's green solution providers with global investors and clients. It was also a significant political event as the new Prime Minister and his Premier's attended to kick off Vancouver's climate talks. Lighter footprint is also a foundational goal in Vancouver to support residents to lighten their ecological footprint. A proxy was developed as there is no readily available data to measure our per capita ecological footprint, though we are working on that. Our proxy is people empowered via community projects or who are under training to enable lifestyle changes towards lightening their own footprint. Since 2011, we have engaged over 13,000 people in taking action on Greenest City initiatives. The lighter footprint story I'd like to highlight is YIMBY, the city studio project called Yes in My Backyard. It was intended to foster a more inclusive community for homeless citizens. At 4 cafes along Commercial Drive, patrons were encouraged to purchase an extra item in the form of an anonymous voucher to post on a YIMBY board outside the restaurant to later be redeemed by a homeless citizen. This channeling of people's kindness led to over 235 YIMBY vouchers redeemed in 1 week. And the voucher system has caught on in other cities, inspiring development of a toolkit to empower future YIMBYists. Of course, we can't expect the community to make significant changes in sustainability unless we lead the way as an organization. We call this our Green Operations Program, and every department at the city has a detailed departmental action plan, kind of their own version, miniature version of the Greenest City Action Plan. On this slide and in your booklet, you'll see some of the high-level corporate targets that we've chosen. There are a number of great stories from our internal operations, but I want to mention Vancouver Police Department's 700 square foot vegetable garden on the headquarter rooftop. They've had that since 2013. The food grown is donated to the Urban Native Youth Association and the Lookout Shelter. In 2015, in partnership with Hives for Humanity, they also added 2 beehives. And VPD also launched 529 Garage in 2015 to reduce bicycle theft and encourage more people to cycle. I also want to mention Van Dusen Garden. There was a big event last night to celebrate Van Dusen Garden receiving its petals. It's got 4 out of 6 of its petals, and it's the only living building in Vancouver right now. A living building is essentially the highest standard for environmental benefit a building can provide. And it actually means the building improves the environment in the area around it. So it's a very high standard, and we should be very proud of meeting that. This is my last slide, and it summarizes some of the work and some of our accomplishments. I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank all of the goal owners who are represented here today, for without their hard work, their innovation, and their collaboration, none of this would have been possible. I'd also like to thank and recognize Lloyd Lee beside me here, who did all the heavy lifting for this update. And now we are available if you have any questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the great presentation and booklet. Congratulations on once again capturing a very detailed and complex story around the city's action plan and all the targets and goals, and distilling it down to some very helpful key facts and figures and stories. So we've got a whole bunch of councillors on the queue. I'm going to start with some general questions, if I may, and I'll start my own timer here. The quest to be the greenest city in the world by 2020. I'd love a sense from the staff team represented by you, Doug, in terms of our progress towards that, how we're doing, what the landscape looks like out there, other cities that are striving. I know the new mayor of London has said that he wants to make London the greenest city in the world now, upon his election just some weeks ago. So by the sounds of it, the competition is intensifying, but from this report, it looks like we're well on our way and tracking on our progress. But I'm curious how staff sees our progress versus other cities around the world right now.
Well, as you know, there is no Oscar for greenest city in the world. So by 2020, there won't be a big award, a big competition. It's an aspirational goal. And we're actually very excited that other cities are getting more and more involved and getting more and more engaged. It not only puts the pressure on us to live up to our standards, but also brings a lot of people around. And we learn a lot from the other cities that are doing this. From a staff point of view, I think we're very happy with where we're at with 2020 and with the goals we're heading towards. A lot of our targets, we've either met them or we're getting close to them. There are a couple of targets that we're going to be struggling with, but that's to be expected. We didn't want to hit every one. We want to be aspirational. Having said that, I think the next big step is what's beyond 2020. We do have the Renewable City Strategy, which is going to be a big push for us, but I think we want to keep moving forward with, once we get closer to 2020, what are going to be the next big goals that we're going to have to move towards and to improve the city overall? And how do we integrate the things we're doing from a sustainability point of view with respect to all the other critical priorities across the city, whether it's affordable housing or whether it's healthy cities?
Right, and remind me, so we've had some independent third parties look at what the greenest city in the world is. We had The Economist working with Siemens on this a few years ago. I haven't heard an update on whether they're going to do another survey globally of greenest cities, and that was by continents, I believe, the last time they did it. But there's been a few others that we've ranked top 5, top 10, and certainly in recent years. Is there anything emerging right now, or a definitive standard that you're seeing on the radar?
Probably the closest thing would be the greenhouse gas per capita that we're seeing, where we're in the top 5 right now in the world for major cities that are actually tracking through the carbon disclosure program, which is kind of the gold standard across the world for tracking our carbon. That's probably the best way to see how we're moving forward. But as you know, Greenest City isn't just carbon, it's food, it's green economy, it's a whole number of other goals that we also want to pay attention to.
Right.
Mr. Mayor, if I can jump in too, you're aware of it and Doug mentioned it. While there isn't an Oscars award program, C40 has established kind of the preeminent awards program globally for work on addressing these issues in cities, and Vancouver won that award last year. And that is pretty much at this point the largest, most significant form of recognition and award program for any organization across the globe. As far as we know, Economist is not doing their Green City Index anymore, so we've kind of been calibrating on where C40 is at in their recognition. So it was obviously a significant recognition for Vancouver and the fact that we received that award.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. So just focus down on building emissions, which have been challenging for many years, or the early years of the plan in particular, and trying to get momentum around retrofits, energy efficiency retrofit, and saving energy in our buildings and homes, particularly the existing buildings, recognizing the progress we're making with new buildings, but it's good to see we're finally getting some traction in terms of reducing the emissions and impact of our existing building stock. Can you speak a little? Obviously, we have an item related to zero energy buildings, or zero emission buildings. My apologies. Ahead of us here, we've had lots of efforts to try and help finance people to do their own retrofitting. We've got groups like Empower Me that are helping at this point at a neighborhood scale. Can you give a sense for how we're making progress on that front, whether it looks promising, that the momentum is really there? Is it a blip right now, or do we have a good chance of actually achieving in our existing buildings a major reduction in the pollution emissions, energy use?
I'm going to ask Sean Pander, our Green Building Manager, to come up and answer that one.
Mm-hmm.
Mayor and Council, yes, as we will be discussing next, we'll be talking about new buildings, but for the existing buildings, we've made significant progress towards that target. We are actually achieved the target of 20% lower greenhouse gas emissions across the building stock and industry. Now, that said, that is somewhat hides some of what's going on, because we've had unusually warm winters, which obviously has forced down the gas demand. So we view that there's still work to be done. We are seeing success in that field. The retrofit of detached houses has slowed down somewhat, but we're hoping with some of the initiatives that we're working on, such as thermal imaging and an expansion of engagement of homeowners, that we can work with our utility partners and see uptake of those incentives. We've been having really good success working with Landlord BC to get the apartment rental stock retrofit, either directly or in partnership with Fortis BC, who also has a program very similar to ours. We are now just emerging and working on a plan and tools to actually significantly engage the condominium buildings and to engage them to retrofit. So we're quite excited about that and look forward to launching a new program for that early next year.
Okay, thanks very much for that update. I'm going to go to questions from the rest of Council. Councillor Reimer is first, and first a thanks to you for your leadership on this on behalf of Council. Cracking the whip, making sure we're on pace with the initiatives that we bring before Council here and put into motion for staff and the community to make real. Councillor Reimer.
On the number side, and then a few on specific policy areas. So on the number side, 3.9 tons per person. As you pointed out, that's very rarely seen in the world. I think you said top 5% of city, or top 5 cities in the world in terms of impact. Can you tell us a bit about the other 4, where they're located?
Yeah, I've got the list of the other cities here. So Oslo is the lowest at 2.0. Stockholm at 2.8, Copenhagen at 2.8, Vancouver 3.9, and London at 4.7.
That's fantastic.
Relative to some of our local neighbors here, we've got Surrey at 4.5, and they benefit as well from the hydroelectric power that we get here. Toronto 7.4, Seattle 7.9, and Portland at 12.5.
Yes, I was just in Portland speaking at an energy conference, and one need only look at the highways there to understand where their challenge is on greenhouse gases. And that is actually where I was going to go next with it, is not transportation, but the pie. So our pie, transportation, is an increasingly small wedge, and buildings are increasingly large wedge, not because one is increasing or, well, because transportation is decreasing, but the building side of things, you pointed out that natural gas prices or the weather did us a favor this past winter, but that really, if you want to be Oslo or Copenhagen or Stockholm, all much colder cities than here, which is interesting, it is about the buildings and what you're doing with the buildings. Can you speak to that a bit, what slice of the pie it is and what impact building codes can have on it?
The really big difference for those cities is they started way before we did. They started in the early 90s as far as upgrading their building codes. Oslo, for example, requires passive house for all new buildings built within the city. So that's a standard for every new building now. They're retrofitting old houses. We saw an apartment block being retrofitted to a passive house standard. It's tricky enough to build to a passive house. Retrofitting to passive houses, really pushing the boundary. And they're even pushing the boundary further as far as the construction sites. They're requiring zero emission construction sites, where even the vehicles that are working on the sites have to be electric or biodiesel.
Wow.
So that's part of it. They have a really, really good incentive program to work with their businesses, and they do competitions, and they incentivize the developers to basically push the boundaries as hard as they can and try to set the standard, as opposed to government saying, here's what you need to do. They kind of let industry lead by having these competitions and incentivizing them to move forward. And so we're trying to learn from some of those organizations to see if we can do something similar here.
And 3.9 tons per person, we're still not at 1.5 degrees. Like, that doesn't equal, if everybody on the planet was at 3.9 tons, that still wouldn't get us where we need to go on climate.
We need to be closer to 2.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay. So we haven't hit the wall yet. Every year on Greenest City, when we first did Greenest City, we had a national government that clearly wasn't coming to the table, a provincial government that we hope will eventually come to the table, but we still await their update on the climate action plan. So, really everything in here is stuff that the city is doing in partnership, and I emphasize that, with academic institutions, Empower Me, businesses, whoever it is, but we keep getting progress. So can you speak a bit about how are we doing this?
I think one of the things that is driving our progress is what we're doing right now, is the accountability associated with our plan. A lot of other plans in other cities, they have goals and they set them out and they go to do them, and then they kind of get buried. The fact that we're so public about the work we're doing, and it's not only expected by city council and senior management here, it's expected by our residents that we do things. And so not only does keeping Greenest City in the public eye force us to drive harder and work harder, the residents and the businesses and the developers are all stepping up and doing their own bit. We're absolutely doing a lot of good work in policy, but the community around us and the businesses around us are doing a huge amount of work to lift us up as well and make us one of the greenest cities.
I think the most exciting thing that I saw this year, and there's lots to get excited about, but the Empower Me program, and really glad they're here today to be recognized, because there's different layers we've sort of been able to permeate in the city around, because ultimately it does depend on someone making a choice to put something in a green bin, take transit, do the retrofit. So can you speak a bit more to Empower Me and what difference that's making in our city and our ability to outreach?
One of the great things about Empower Me is there are programs in place for people who speak English as a first language, and also from a cultural point of view, we know what websites to go to or what people to talk to at Home Depot if you want to get equipment updated on your home. What I love about Empower Me is it reaches out to new Canadians, people from a different culture, and works with them on their terms, and actually goes into their homes and builds a sense of trust and gets them to make changes in their own lifestyle towards being greener. The other thing is whenever somebody comes to a new country, there's an opportunity to make changes, and whether that's transportation choices or energy upgrades to your house, or what you buy and what you purchase. Those are all great opportunities when someone is new to the country or new to the city. And so that's another piece I love about Empower Me. You're taking advantage of someone who's coming with excitement and wanting to start something new and putting them on the right track.
Okay, that's your time, Councillor Reimer. Thank you. Councillor Meggs.
Thanks very much. It is a great report, but the problem with good news is that it often seems boring to people. It disappears into the backdrop, so it's very hard to get front page news that we continue to make these great gains. But I wonder if you could just remind us about how you actually calculate this, because I have often envisaged your team in the basement with a range of computer monitors, a big digital screen flashing the number of tons or something. I mean, we had the debt clock brought out by some people to emphasize that problem. Very quickly, how do you calculate the gains in each area and roll it up? Because it must be a difficult task.
Well, what makes our lives a little bit easier is the different goals are owned by different goal owners. So there's groups in engineering, groups in parks, groups in social policy that own different goals. Vancouver Economic Commission is another example. They track their own goals as part of their own work. So we don't have a team that are tracking all the detailed goals. We do track our own goals, which are related to the green buildings and related to the climate component of it. But the rest of the goals are tracked through the different departments. And again, back to the accountability that this whole program brings, because we know these goals are being tracked and we have to report out, it's a priority for staff to stay on top of them and not only making sure that we are getting the data, but that we're moving forward and that we're putting our projects and getting them done to actually move the targets forward, because we know there's going to be a reckoning every year.
Yeah, so it's pretty straightforward and transparent, is it, to demonstrate to someone who understands the numbers that these are real achievements and they're not simply aspirational goals or something like that?
Absolutely. Any of the numbers that we produce are very transparent. We can provide the background details to anybody who wants them. And wherever possible, we follow international protocols, whether it's around carbon accounting or whether it's how we count our tonnage of waste, or what we even consider renewable energy. We try to.
What I find exciting about it is that I look back at the goals that were set, and it doesn't feel that it was that difficult. And yet so the whole planet needs to make a turn in this direction, and it seems overwhelming. But you look at the changes that have occurred here, and they proved relatively easy to do. Do you have not to say that it was simple or a breeze, but here we are. And so I wonder if you have a sense of what the cost benefit has been for taxpayers. In other words, we see reduction of organic waste. I know that that's saved us a lot of money in various ways. Are you able to say to people, look, we put a lot of work in, but here, if you're not worried about climate change in itself, here's the saving to taxpayers? Because there are many in here, I think.
I think on a case-by-case basis for the individual goals, the individual targets, we could probably look at here's the cost benefit, and the value may not just be money. There's a lot of social benefits and other benefits to go with it. I don't have sort of a global, here's the cost benefit of the GCAP plan. But when you look at the work we're doing and how most of this work is embedded through the city, this isn't a standalone side project. This is actually core to our culture and what we do. It's no different than running your finances properly and ensuring you have a safe operation. Being sustainable is part of that. And I think because of that, the cost is very, very reasonable because it is part of our core business.
Well, I'm certain that I'm sure that it's cost positive, but I think your analogy to financial rules is valid, because no one would say, let's save by not having an auditor. But I guess the last question I would ask is on the individual level. I mean, because it's all accumulated and we say, well, we're reaching our goals and we're the greenest and so forth, we don't really have a sense for taxpayers about the costs avoided or the risks avoided. So that was the only concern I had listening to the report. We have, you mentioned the urban food aspect, and one thing that I've been dealing with recently, and I'm sure other councillors have, is the concerns of warehouse operators on Produce Row who see themselves as part of the food ecosystem and see consequences coming, which engineering is working hard on in terms of changes to the viaducts and all of that kind of thing. What sort of forward planning mechanisms do we have to sort of anticipate changes that could be negative and trying to mitigate them? I mean, I know there's an enormous effort being made to mitigate that change, but are we able to look a little bit over the horizon and say, well, if we continue on this course or this keeps happening, we could run into difficulties, or are we simply working in our established zone and trying to get the numbers down?
One of the big things we've noticed with climate change is we can't look backwards anymore with a lot of our predictions, whether it's, looking at rainfall or whether it's looking at food that we can grow in the region. We really need to do a bit of guessing and look forward and do be a bit of a futurist in all of the different projects we're doing. So we're finding it's a challenge because it's a different way to do business for us, but we've done it in a number of different areas. And again, whether it's designing our sewer pipes or looking at our food systems, or through our climate adaptation program, which is looking at future potential sea level rise, heat issues, other rainfall issues. We have been looking forward as much as possible and trying to anticipate how to address those things.
Yeah. I'm out of time, but I think that interdisciplinary and strategic approach is a huge potential gain we could make further on this. Thanks for your report.
Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Meggs. Councillor Carr.
Yes, thanks, Mr. Mayor, and thank you to yourself and all the staff, Ms. Smith, in terms of the work on this. Incredibly important for our city. My first question is really a follow-up to Councillor Meggs, and that is around what baseline data we use. Science is changing very rapidly on the climate issue. I mean, just this year we've had reports that very much change the expectation around sea level rise from 90 centimeters to upwards of 3 or even 5 or 7, and I've seen as high as 9 meters sea level rise within by 2100. I mean, it's frightening. Mm-hmm. So how are we adapting our plan to the changing science?
We did our climate adaptation projections 2 years ago, 3 years ago now, 2013. And we were very comfortable with those numbers at the time, but as you say, they are moving forward. We were trying to be conservative, ensure that we were erring on the side of caution, but not trying to obviously spend more money than we need to do to respond to climate change. We're going to be updating and refreshing our climate adaptation strategy in 2017. And as part of that, we'll be looking at the best science available to ensure that we're on top of it and making sure that we're being as conservative as possible, but again, not being alarmist, because there's going to be extremes in any of those predictions. Some of those are probably not going to happen, but I think I agree with you that things are happening quicker than we originally anticipated 3 years ago.
It's what I want to hear. We're looking at an update, and that's, I think, what we need to do. In terms of the 1.5 degrees Celsius new global objective, are we adapting also our plans to meet that? I mean, maybe the 2 tons you mentioned to Councillor Reimer, 2 tons GHGs per person, is where we need to head. Is that a 2 degree Celsius target or a 1.5 degrees Celsius? This is holding global average temperature to below that.
Yep. Well, our renewable city strategy has basically laid that out for us. Our intent is to reduce our GHGs by 80%. By 2050, and to basically have zero emissions in the city by 2050, before 2050.
Right.
That will actually get us towards the 1.5 degree target. If we can meet those goals, we will be doing our part internationally to meet those targets.
Right. Okay. Good. It's going to be a big change. I don't think people understand how big. So in terms of buildings, I know we're going to get another report on this, but I'm really curious about what percentage of the overall buildings are new versus ones that need to be retrofitted? So what percentage of the stock? I know we're really moving to get the stock better, but how much retrofit needs to happen?
If you can be patient, Sean will give you that information
Excellent.
When he follows up with the report after this one.
Okay. It also follows from that next report, but I was very taken in terms of the green economy, in terms of the movement possible around our objectives, which are zero emission buildings. Mm-hmm. And we've received some letters, in fact, that are from the industry saying there is huge room in the green economy around this. Would that also be in the next report? Okay.
Yeah, that's a really important piece of the green building goal. It's not just about moving our building designs and our codes forward. It's actually about improving the whole supply chain and the design and construction industry. And not only will it elevate their ability here, it'll make them subject matter experts that they'll be able to sell that all across North America. So it'll be a huge boon for our green economy.
Passive house components. I'd like to see us a center.
Yes.
In terms of, on a different track, access to nature, I worry about the 5-minute walk to green space, nature, so to speak, but why I worry about it is if we drop the notion, and I hope we don't ever, of a certain amount of green space per 1,000 people, we have a chance of retaining larger green spaces. And I worry about the smaller ones, which are not so great for protecting biodiversity, for example.
Right. The Parks Board does have their own goal around the amount of green space per capita, and that is still one of their important targets that they still work towards. With respect to the 5-minute walk, we are working with Parks Board on adapting that goal and maybe evolving it a little bit to actually be more efficient, more effective, so more people will actually get more access to green space. I could bring up Dave here to just touch on that briefly, but we will probably be coming back in the next 6 months or so with a more detailed report on that. You want to come up, Dave?
Sure.
This is Dave Hutch from the Parks Board.
Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor and members of council. Dave Hutch, Manager of Planning with the Park Board. To address your question, as Mr. Smith was saying, we are evolving the 5-minute metric, which was a land-based metric, for it to be more relevant to population and accessibility. So we're using census data, so we're working with where people live and their density, and then looking at accessibility, the street network, and how people get to parks to make that metric more relevant, as Mr. Smith was saying. And then with regards to the Park Board's 2.75 acres per 1,000 for neighborhood park provision within the city, that was established in 1992, and Vancouver's evolved greatly since then in terms of our growth corridors, our downtown core. So as part of our Parks and Recreation Services Master Plan, which is kicking off this fall, we'll be evaluating that metric as well. That will help give us direction in terms of the scale and quality of parks, and what is a relevant metric in our higher density growth areas and what's achievable. And we'll be bringing that information back.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Carr. Councillor DiGenova.
Thank you very much. I just had a couple of my questions have already been covered off, but regarding the, maybe Mr. Hutch doesn't want to sit down yet. Sorry. The 2.75 acres of green space per 1,000 people versus the 5-minute walk, which was just discussed. As density increases, are we looking at certain neighborhoods and areas in particular? As, for example, neighborhoods near Stanley Park or Queen Elizabeth Park or Hastings Park may have more green space in one pocket. Would we be looking also at how that green space is dispersed and planning for areas of green space in the city in the future?
Absolutely. That'll be part of our Parks and Recreation Services Master Plan. We'll be looking at park provision and service level throughout the city and understanding the unique corridors and density growth areas that we have in the city. As you mentioned, the Cambie corridor, the downtown core, future in Broadway corridor. So we'll be looking at those very specifically in that study.
And I would assume that you work with the city on that and consult as to where you would like green space?
Absolutely. We have a cross-departmental team already set up for the master plan.
Very good. Thank you very much. My next question is regarding the targets and how we measure ourselves. I know that was asked, but we're not calling ourselves the greenest city we can be. We're calling ourselves the greenest city in the world. So how is the measurements that we use different than the measurements that other cities who claim to be the greenest city in the world or are aiming to be the greenest city in the world? So how do we measure ourselves, and is there a universal measurement for that?
From a carbon point of view, there absolutely is a universal measurement, or not universal, but basically a gold standard internationally, which is through the Carbon Disclosure Program. And we do follow that protocol, and so we can compare ourselves to other cities who are following that same protocol, and most major cities in the world are following that protocol. The difficulty with the other claims out there is it's very locally based. So, for example, New York reduced their greenhouse gas emissions by a huge number by converting a bunch of coal plants down to natural gas. That's a great benefit, but you know it's apples and pineapples because we have hydroelectric power, so we're not comparing the same as them as far as reducing greenhouse gases. I think where we're absolutely going to want to go to is zero emissions. I mean, that's where our final goal is through our renewable city strategy, is having 100% renewable energy. And cities, not only Vancouver, other cities will be able to accomplish this. And that will be at the end of the day, the gold standard on what is a renewable city is if you have no emissions.
So in some ways, Vancouver could be the greenest city in certain ways, and other cities could be the greenest city in other ways. That's what you're basically saying, that we might not be the greenest city. It would only be in a category, like as per the Oscars or the Academy Awards, as our city manager said.
Could be in a category, yes, absolutely, though I'd like to think we are probably one of the best cities in the world and one of the greenest cities in the world.
Okay, so that brings me to my next question. As I was actually walking through the park the other day, I saw all of our lovely garbage cans with Greenest City 2020. I'm wondering if that's a realistic target for us still. Now we're in 2017, and I understand it was quite some years ago that target was set at 2020, and just asking that question over and over as we sort of come back to council every year here. Are we meeting those goals and targets? Have we exceeded those goals and targets? Do we feel that we need to move 2020 to 2021, 2025, 2040, 2050? Because renewable energy, I understand the motion put forward was 2040. So then should we be moving our targets from 2020 to 2040?
No. I believe that our 2020 targets are good. We're going to hit and exceed some of those for sure. There's going to be some that we won't hit, but that doesn't mean you move the targets. That just means that you focus on what's going to happen after. So I think we keep working as hard as possible towards our 2020 goals and our 2020 targets. And prior to 2020, we come back to council with a new plan and figure out what 2025 and 2030 will look like.
Okay, well, I have more questions on that because I'm still not quite clear, but I'll ask my last question first and then send you other questions. It's regarding electric vehicles. You had talked about the increase in electric vehicles. However, as we're planning for development and infrastructure in the city of Vancouver, one of the issues that we have is we're seeing sort of a number of, we're trying to decrease parking. So how are we going to plan for electric vehicles, but at the same and infrastructure at the same time, we're encouraging people to use other modes of active transportation? Considering electric vehicles are now becoming more affordable, I'm wondering how we would move forward with that and how we're planning for electric vehicles in the future, not just charging stations, but infrastructure.
Yeah, infrastructure in general. What we're seeing in some of the successful cities that have seen a significant increase in electric vehicles is a lot of public infrastructure around charging to remove that range anxiety you get with electric vehicles. And that's going to go away soon because the range is going to be the same as gasoline-powered cars in the next 5 years. The other thing we're doing is the Canadian Electrical Code has been updated that you can do what's called load management in a building now. So the amount of power you can currently put into a building, or you currently need to put in a building, you can use a computer to manage that load, and you can basically add significant electric vehicle charging without having to add more power to the building. So this is really good news from a retrofit point of view and a really good news from an existing building point of view.
I was talking about roads and parking, but I'm okay.
You're well over time.
As well. So we will be coming back to council this fall with an electric vehicle infrastructure charging strategy to talk about how we're going to be putting more charging infrastructure on our roads.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Councillor Deal's next.
Thanks very much. Great report. I love these. I hand a lot of these out, so paper form, sorry. I'll start with a question that was related to some of the last questions you got. We exceeded or we reached our target already on active transportation, and in 2015, our 2020 goal was met at 50%. As we move forward with some new opportunities coming forward, I'm thinking in particular of the Arbutus Corridor, Broadway Subway, and Moby bike system. Are we looking at changing that target? You may have said this in your presentation and I missed it. I apologize if you did. Are we looking at adjusting that target previous to 2020?
No, I don't think we'll adjust the 2020 target, but we do have a 2040 transportation plan that has a target of 2/3 mode split.
Yeah.
And we'll keep, ideally we can draw a relatively straight line between where we are today and where we're going to be in 2040 and see if we're on track for that.
Okay, so rather than toying around with individual targets within the Greenest City, we aim for the big target in 2040.
Exactly.
Got it. Just a follow-up question on that then. In terms of, those are the three biggies I see coming up, the Broadway Subway being by far the largest, but also the Arbutus Corridor and the Moby bike system. How do you see the Arbutus Corridor, for instance, helping us reach our goals in terms of transportation? Like right now people are thinking about it as a lovely thing and a nice thing and a recreational thing. I'd like to dig a little bit more into it as an active transportation target reaching tool.
I believe the Arbutus Corridor can be both. I think it's got the opportunity to be an amazing greenway in the city, so not only a transportation system, but a place for public art, a place for benches, a place for park space.
Art beauties.
Yeah, I think it's got amazing potential to be a public amenity, but there is enough space there that we're going to have very good walking, cycling, and future transit amenity there, potentially a streetcar. And by providing those opportunities and those options for the public, it'll just make it so much easier, especially for people in the south end of the city who don't typically have access to as much infrastructure as you see in the downtown core. They'll make some better decisions about mode shift and maybe ride their bikes more frequently.
Exactly what I'm looking for. I think that we talk a lot about the west and the east in the city. We don't talk as much about the north and the south, but as soon as you hit that ridge or even 16th Avenue, we know that the amenities decrease, as does the density, and that anything that makes it easier to go north-south, I think, would be fantastic. I'll move on now to something around the urban agriculture and local food. I noticed that when you mentioned the trees, you talked about the challenge being getting trees. The public realm is kind of full. We need to now go into private. It seems like that's also happening with local food and urban agriculture. So we've got our new policies in place. Are we looking very actively at private realm for the use of food production now in the city?
I'm going to see if someone from social policy is here. Yep, James O'Neill is here.
There we go. Well, hello, James.
Hello, James O'Neill from Social Policy. So we are looking at absolutely on private development as well as city land for urban agriculture. And urban agriculture is a spectrum of growing different ways, methods through community gardens or private growing in people's backyards. So we are encouraging all different forms of growing within the city, and the city does support in different ways communal growing on parks, in churches and co-ops, and in different ways. So yes, we definitely are encouraging that, and they all account part of our food assets and our targets, and we count those each year.
Excellent. And we're also looking, I understand, at industrial lands, for instance. There's a lot of flat black roofs in industrial lands, and I'm wondering if we're looking at those as potential sites for food growth.
Yes, the urban farming policy that came forward to council earlier this year does contemplate growing with buildings, either within buildings or on rooftops as needed. So it is a defined use on zoned land to grow food for commercial purposes, and they can do that on roofs. It does question, though, around the building bylaw and making sure that that is still allowable within the building bylaw.
Right, that it's weight bearing, et cetera.
Yes.
Fantastic. And then just the last question I have is, we have a report coming up in a few minutes around lawns. And if people were to choose to use, instead of putting turf on their lawns, but actually using that for food production, would that increase the amount of space available in the city for food production?
Absolutely, that would be fantastic. More kale, less lawns, as I have a sign on my desk. So would definitely encourage more food growing for personal consumption in your front and backyard as you choose to do so. Absolutely, there's great social, environmental benefits with growing your own food in your own backyard.
Or front, yeah.
Our front, yes.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yep.
All right, thanks, Councillor Deal. Councillor Louis is next.
I'll have you know that I grow food in my front yard. Come to my house. We'll give you a lesson. I've seen your lawn. So, great report. Thanks. Yes, where are the pineapples in our city? I think, Mr. Smith, you had said pineapples a little bit earlier. Great report. It's really nice to have the metrics for us to continue to be able to track our progress. As the mayor said, we're having some people follow along on our path to becoming the greenest city, and this nice challenge. It's not just an aspirational goal in terms of this document in our words, but it's inspirational. It's good to see the other cities around the world take notice of what we're trying to do here in the city. I do have a couple of questions in regards to transit, and I know the report speaks briefly of it, but it is so integral to part of our effort. When we have a no vote on the referendum that was foisted on us by the province, and we find ourselves in this quagmire of limited funding, how do we move forward with this limited amount of funding and this lack of transit?
I'm going to pass that very easy question over to Taryn Scollard from engineering. Unless there's someone from transportation. I'll tell you what I know. So for the from the transit, I do know that we are still planning for the Broadway subway. I know we're still negotiating to get some funding in place, but TransLink is working very closely with us now. We're quite happy with the results we're getting with TransLink. And as you know, there was some recent funding that was announced. I am under the impression that there are conversations still ongoing with both levels of government, the provincial and the federal government, to see what the next phase of that funding will be. And because it is such a critical piece of Vancouver's planning moving forward to get that Broadway subway in place, I don't think we're going to give up on that one.
No, we shouldn't. And I was giving you the opportunity because I know that the federal government has committed 50-cent dollars, and we'd hoped the province would come to the table with 40 cents of every dollar, and we would pay our fair share, which is around 10 cents. And we're still hoping that the province takes us up on that formula, given that that matches what we as residents in Vancouver pay in terms of taxes, 50% to the federal government, 40% to the province, and 10% goes to local government. So we can't beat that drum enough, I think. In regards to park space, I just wanted to, perhaps Mr. Hutch, where are you? There we are. Just touch base with you on the quality versus quantity piece, because a lot of the conversation so far has talked about the measurement of the amount of space, but there is a quantitative difference between active space and passive space. And in our city, we mostly have active space, I would think, outside of Stanley Park. But how do the park board's effort integrate with the regional effort? Because we contribute as a city to a regional park system as well, which is primarily passive space. And maybe just describe how we take that into account and the proximity and the use and the availability of that to our residents.
So one of the tasks ahead for us in the Parks and Rec Services Master Plan will be to redefine our park classification system. Right now we have two classifications: destination park, so that would be like QE Park and Stanley Park, and neighborhood park, which encompasses everything else. And we know that a lot of the neighborhood parks actually act more like community destination parks. John Hendry Park is a good example. It's almost like an East Side destination park. So as part of that exercise, what we'll be diving into is understanding the program elements, the kind of qualitative elements of each of those different kinds of parks to help us understand the classification system, and then what's our service level across the city for those different kinds of classifications of parks. So we're taking a very objective approach, and at the same time looking at parks at Metro Van, Pacific Spirit, and then our neighboring parks along the border with Burnaby as well, and how they feed into the system. Along with that, our accessibility metric around the 5-minute walk, and then our provision standard around how much area we should do, the 2.75 acres.
Yeah, and I think that's where I think there needs to be an adjustment perhaps in thinking that our measurement to walkability to a more neighborhoods / active park is important in terms of internal proximity within a city. But there has to be also a recognition of our contribution at a Metro Vancouver level to all these Metro Vancouver parks that are outside our boundaries, but in fairly close proximity, whether they be Pacific Spirit Park or the parks in the North Shore or out in Langley. These are the space in Richmond. These are all fabulous spaces. But they need to be put into the measure somewhere, because otherwise, why are we contributing as a city to these regional parks? And then, back to my transit question, the accessibility of these regional spaces that we contribute to, and how accessible, not just the 5-minute walk, but are they accessible by transit? And how will we go about directing people and encouraging that type of use? And, because since we do pay for it, we should be putting it into the stock and availability of this type of more passive natural space and include it as part of our effort, because it's not just what happens in our city. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Just wondering how much more difficult it is to get to number 1 and surpass number 2 and second and third. I mean, how difficult is that, do you think?
Are you talking about in terms of greenhouse gases?
Yeah. Well, and to be the greenest city in the world. Our aspirational goal.
Like I mentioned earlier, it is a very local measurement, and what's important to us here in Vancouver may not be the same as in Stockholm and the same as in London. And there's also ways different people measure different things. Oslo is incinerating waste and using that for their heat for their buildings, and they use that and they call that renewable energy. We don't here in Vancouver. And so again, it is a bit of an apples and oranges conversation. But as far as
couldn't we just say we're number one now?
we're
number one. Who's going to argue?
But I still think we need to figure out what our own limits are and how far we can push in Vancouver, and more importantly, the region and in the province, to move ourselves forward and making sure we're being as green as possible, as opposed to saying, how are we doing relative to London and Oslo? I think those are important conversations, and we learn a lot from those cities, but we need to look internally and make sure we're striving to be the absolute best we can. And the fact that we've set a target of 0 greenhouse gases in the city by 2050 is as good as we're going to get on that front. That's an amazing target, and we're going to have to work very hard to get there, but I think we can. There's the other pieces we still want to hit, like food, green economy, all those bits and pieces.
Right, and I guess, being the greenest city is quite a broad term, I guess, the way as you described. But and you heard from another councillor about the transit question, and without the Broadway line, are we going to get to some of the other goals? Certainly, the 2040 transportation plan, which is built into this. Do we have any idea, given the fact that there is no commitment from other cities in the region, there is no commitment from the province and the level that we're going, we're sort of doing this on our own, a lot of this, and the next report kind of touches on that as well. But do we have any idea what cost this will be to us in Vancouver to reach these aspirational goals?
As was discussed earlier, I don't believe there will be a cost. I think we're actually saving the taxpayers' money by being forward-thinking in what we're doing. What we're doing is, we're not on an island. We just happen to be ahead of the curve. Every major city in the world and our region will have to do what we're doing. The fact that we're doing it first will actually allow us to learn from it, will allow us to take advantage of it. When New York built their subways in the 1800s, people said, why are you building subways? They don't have those in Buffalo. But the fact that they were able to be forward-thinking and build something ahead of other cities helped them develop and become an economic powerhouse. I think we're in that same position, where we need to do what we know is right, move forward, be aggressive with doing the right thing for the environment and for society, and other cities will catch up, and they won't see the same benefits we will by being early adopters.
Well, we could argue about the cost. I mean, we have the report coming to us next is into the millions of dollars of costs to set up an organization. This money doesn't grow on trees. It comes from the taxpayers of the city. So it's not free to reach some of these goals that are set out in the plan. And I guess the question I have, that worries me is, how this affects affordability. If we reach these aspirational goals, then we become the most unaffordable city in the world, which we pretty much are already. To what end is that an achievement? Is the balance to reach these lofty goals in a short order, but also then Vancouver becomes a city for only the rich?
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to jump in if I could. Because what we've tried to do, Councillor, throughout the development of the Greenest City Action Plan is to pursue initiatives that actually save our residents money. For instance, if a two-car family can go down to a one-car family or eliminate a car altogether, they save money. We know that owning and operating a car is between $7,000 and $10,000 a year. So if Vancouver is a convenient place to get around with a car, that family can then save that money. Same with what you heard about more energy efficient buildings. Heating your home in the winter for $20 a year, that makes it a more affordable place to live. So many of the strategies that we pursue, whether it's supporting farming in your backyard or being able to get around by a bike or by walking, those are all strategies that help to make our city actually a more affordable place. And globally, it's being recognized that pursuing energy efficiency in these strategies actually help with the bottom line to make the community more competitive in attracting workers, but also in reducing costs for those residents, so that we definitely are very aware of affordability concerns and pursue them very aggressively through the Greenest City Action Plan.
I appreciate that, Mr. City Manager, but those are analogies or examples, but do we have any hard statistics that prove what you're saying? Saying for a Vancouverite, if you use the example of a two-car, one car, and the cost and your taxes going up, I mean, do we have anything, this is a nice report, but it doesn't really provide me with that information in a specific way mathematically, showing me, okay, if I, and I'm, you know, I live in a very small footprint downtown with 3 kids. I perhaps live the dream of the greenest city. I don't know, I have a roof garden, you know, but I don't have data that shows that that is actually the case. And I think we know we're becoming more unaffordable. We are. And so I question whether or not the cost of this program is making Vancouver more unaffordable. And I don't think that's, I appreciate that, but it's not really the answer.
So is that a rhetorical question, or do you?
No, I mean, where is the data that to prove what you're saying?
Throughout many cities across the world, we engage through C40 around the economic impact of these activities. Many cities have demonstrated that there are competitive advantages and financial savings to be had. Just now, Mr. Smith outlined a 20% reduction in energy consumption. If you think about how much we spend across the city in energy, by reducing the amount that we spend on energy by 20%, that's money that is being saved by businesses and consumers, residents in our city. So that's a direct savings that we're able to achieve.
Taxes go up by 50%. It's not really.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Affleck. I believe taxes have averaged less than 2% increase in the city for the last almost 8 years. That is all the questions. Thank you very much, Mr. Smith, and to the whole team who worked on this. Thanks for putting together the report back. All the work on the numbers that validate the good work that's being done and progress we're making towards our goals there. Appreciate the update and all the related initiatives that are coming forward to Council to ensure we make it to these targets. Thanks very much for the good work. That is our first report reference, and we're going to shift gears slightly and talk more specifically about our zero emissions building plan. We have received requests to speak to this matter, so should Council wish to hear speakers, we can receive the presentation today, and we can refer the related report to tomorrow's Standing Committee on City Finance and Services meeting. That starts at 9:30 in the morning. Councillor Carr will move referral. A seconder for that? Councillor Jang, and all in favor of referral to hear the speakers tomorrow and the presentation today? Any opposed? And that carries. So we'll bring back the report and speakers will be tomorrow. For now, we will hear the presentation from Sean Pander, who's our Green Building Programs Manager from our Sustainability Group. Mr. Pander, welcome.
Thank you, Mayor. Mayor and Council, it's a real privilege to present this report. This was not an effort that I obviously led or undertook on my own. Chris Higgins here took a significant portion of it. He's on our Green Buildings team, as did Chris Baber with our Neighborhood Energy Utility. But we've had a significant input from staff across the entire Green Buildings team, sustainability, planning and development services, real estate and financial management, finance, as well as law. But we've also had considerable input and engagement and support in developing this plan and trying to align the direction the city's going with other organizations and levels of government. We've had significant input from NGOs, professional associations, business associations, the provincial government, as well as numerous other local governments. So again, the plan that we're bringing forward to achieve zero emissions in new construction by 2030 has had significant involvement across the spectrum. All right, Doug, how do I go forward? Okay, great. So this plan responds to really two targets that Council has adopted. The first is in the Greenest City, it said it established a target to reduce or to require all buildings to achieve carbon neutral operations by the year 2020. More significantly, in the lead up to Paris last year, Council adopted a target to have 100% of the energy used in the city come from renewable sources by 2050. Now, given about 3/4 of all energy use in the city is used in buildings and industry, and the fact that 50% of the buildings that we anticipate will be in place in 2050 are yet to be built, the movement towards zero emissions in new construction is critical to achieving that renewable city target. And this plan really lays out concrete steps for sort of areas of action, how we can transition new construction to that zero emissions by 2030, but to get most of the way there by 2020, and lays out an interim milestone for 2025. The metrics of zero emissions or emissions from buildings is the amount of carbon emitted per unit area. So obviously larger buildings will emit larger carbon. We historically have not had policies or regulations that specifically target greenhouse gas emissions in buildings. We've done it through energy efficiency or energy cost efficiency. But we looked at the requirements in the building code and the rezoning policies over time and typical design responses to determine how we have been historically doing in terms of emissions from new construction, as well as where we think we're going. And as you can see, if we look across the building stock, weighted average by the amount of new development by different building types, that really our baseline was 21 kilograms of carbon per meter squared per year. Currently, we think we are at about 14%, so we've already reduced through our efforts, rezoning and building code, to reduce the emissions from new construction by about 33%. The plan before you today would have the emissions from new construction reduced by 70% by 2020, 90% by 2025, and having all buildings to zero emissions by the year 2030. Really, the question of how does this position us sort of on a global stage? There are many cities across the world working towards zero emissions buildings. They're all using very different metrics. In North America, the Architecture 2030 has sort of set out steps and where more or less you where they think the leaders need to target to be. And really this is a comparison in this plan about what the Architecture 2030 recommended goals are and where we are at. And while we will be only at 70% sort of reduction in carbon emissions from new construction by 2020, whereas the Architecture 2030 recommendation is 80, we will be at that 90% by 2025, which is their recommendation, and zero emissions by 2030. And we would be the first major city in North America to commit to and have a detailed and actionable plan to achieve zero emissions in all new buildings, not just a subset, by the year 2030. Now, one of the things that's important to emphasize within this plan is that there are many different types of buildings in the city, and how they use energy varies greatly. This plan has a very large focus on residential buildings. Residential buildings have a very high amount of greenhouse gas emissions per square foot or per square meter, but they also represent 82% of new development area in the city. When we look at the detached houses, the 4 to 6 story sort of low-rise multi-unit residential buildings and the high-rise multi-unit residential buildings. So a big portion of this plan and the thinking to date that has gone into where we need to go to get there has focused on this big portion of the new building stock. And really what I wanted to outline in this plan is to show that really there are 4 primary areas of action in the plan. The first is to establish very clear limits to be reflected in the building bylaw and in our rezoning policies on greenhouse gases specifically, as opposed to energy cost or energy use efficiency. But also to introduce measures of building envelope and building envelope performance, and that would be thermal energy demand limits. The second is recognizing that if we're going to achieve zero emissions by 2030, it requires significant change, and that change takes time. It's essential that we start building these buildings now to build that experience in our design community, in our trades, in our construction industry, as well as in the supply chains of insulation and windows and the building components that are going to be required to achieve zero emissions. So the second part of the plan is to start demonstrating leadership in city-owned buildings. The third really is looking at those private sector leaders who've already indicated they want to move forward. They want to be building the buildings of the future today, and to help work with them and provide tools to catalyze them to take that step beyond the stepped limits that are going to reduce over time, but to aim for the end goal or near end goal to demonstrate what's the most cost-effective way to do this, what are the barriers and what changes would be needed to be taken to overcome those barriers. And the fourth part of the plan really is to look at an investment in capacity building. As the city moves forward to build zero emissions buildings, and if the private sector is catalyzed to do the same, we can't have that knowledge just sit with city staff and the leaders that do undertake this. We need to invest in tools and a center of excellence to ensure that information is being exchanged about what's working and what's not working so that we can refine our plans over time. I also want to point out that really we have two pathways to reliably achieve zero emissions for new buildings. One of the emphasis of this plan, knowing that most of the development is residential in the city, we've seen evidence and heard from stakeholders that putting complicated mechanical systems into buildings and depending on residential building owners and operators to maintain and operate that equipment at its best efficiency is very, very challenging. We've seen that in our own city residential facilities that we've built. We've talked with BC Housing. They are running into the same issues with the complicated mechanicals. We've heard from the Condominium Homeowners Association saying really the emphasis needs to be on the bones of the building, the window quality and the insulation quality to ensure that it doesn't, we aren't trying to compensate for mediocre design with fancy technology, but we start with really great design. So again, we have two pathways of reliably achieving this. One is we can get the complex mechanicals out by a focus on envelope. And the other approach is to improve the envelope but have a real focus on providing renewable heat energy to those in a secure way, such as through our renewable neighborhood energy systems. One of the things I want to speak to, because it's referenced in the report and in this presentation, is the Passive House Standard. And really, as we began to understand that the emphasis of the plan was on these real and reliable reductions, we said, what's the best standard in the world that focuses specifically on envelope and ventilation performance? And that led us to a deeper understanding of the Passive House Standard. And really, it's the leading global standard for energy-efficient building envelopes. It really focuses on, high levels of insulation, high-performing windows, airtight building envelopes, ventilation heat recovery, and thermal comfort. The standard is applicable to all building types, but most of the data is for residential construction, sort of 6 stories and under. And so I think that's important to note, that we don't know in detail how the Passive House Standard might be applied in its entirety or just certain elements to different building types. And so that's part of the plan takes into account that it provides great lessons on envelopes, but it might not be the ultimate target that we want to shoot for. Finally, the standard is very useful in a transition. Again, it's not that we aim to regulate to Passive House, but it is great in a transition to high-performing building envelopes because it's supported by extensive and ongoing building science research. It's got design tools. It's got locally available training, both from the Canadian Passive House Institute as well as BCIT is now developing courses for trades. But it also provides third-party validation. So really, it's a tool. It is not the standard that we are, looking to regulate to, but it is a great tool to effectively transition and learn and teach ourselves about how to do high-performing building envelopes. I'm going to talk about the major building types that are covered in the plan. In summary, now in greater detail, the limits and some of the actions that we plan to take are detailed in the plan, but really the detached house greenhouse gas intensity targets. Detached housing is not as obvious as the high-rise towers that you see, but it is the single largest form of new development in the city. 44% of new square footage is detached home or duplex in form. And really the plan recognizes that the recent updates to the Vancouver building bylaw significantly reduced those emissions from new homes. The building built to the 2014 building bylaw would have 48% lower greenhouse gas emissions than the bylaw conditions in 2007. And so we're not proposing any significant major new requirements for this form before 2020 as industry really looks to optimize how do they meet that target, how do they do that in the best possible way, and supply chains continue to evolve to meet that target. Really in this sector, the initial focus of the plan is really to catalyze those builders to build to a passive house or another zero emissions approach. So we begin to learn what works, and we can inform more detailed future policy. We can understand what's cost effective. It also requires an investment in capacity building. One of the things we've learned in the development of this plan is the conventional ways that the city and other public sector agencies invest in capacity building through, say, Greater Vancouver Home Builders Association, whatnot. Many of our ethnic builders, that's not how they access information. So really we have an awareness that we will have to look at new tools that help catalyze and share information amongst that segment of builders of this important segment. When we look at low-rise multi-unit residential buildings, they represent about 10% of all new building area, and it provides a real ideal form for passive house. And so the other portion or consideration when we look at low-rise multi-unit residential buildings is they haven't seen the same significant new requirements as the single family did in the building bylaw. So there's really good update to seek alignment between the wood frame construction in our single family and sort of what we expect for window performance and wall performance in that low-rise residential form. And we are looking to bring forward specific recommendations to reduce emissions from this form by over 50% this year. It also looks forward and sort of tries to signal to industry the direction we're taking, and for our rezoning policy, again, to help industry evolve, to require passive house levels of performance by the year 2020 in our rezoning policy. Now, high-rise multi-unit residential buildings, actually this is an image of Cornell University's residential tower. It's a 24-story high-rise residential tower being built in New York City right now. I just had the privilege of going out and talking with the construction management firm to understand what they're learning and the surprises they're encountering, and very encouraging news about the achievability of that in this building form. But really, high-rise MERBs represent about 28% of all new development by area. And it really provides an ideal opportunity to choose between those two pathways. In these high density development areas, you can achieve significant carbon reductions in new construction, either by focusing on providing renewable energy to those buildings, such as through a renewable energy system, with some improvements to efficiency, or you can really focus on reducing energy demand through improved building envelope. We have looked at that form, and we are, if the plan is adopted, we'll be bringing forward changes and updates to the rezoning policy later this year or early next year that would target about a 60% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions for buildings that need to, high-rise multi-unit residential buildings that need to go through a rezoning. And one of the things I do want to point out, and I'm sure there will be additional questions, is that the incremental costs of that first step, the construction costs actually declined slightly, as did the overall long-term operating costs. So these changes to achieve a 61% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions did not increase construction costs or long-term operating costs. I do want to spend a little bit of time just talking about the rezoning policy for green buildings, because it is one of the tools that really helps us learn before we need to codify, and it encourages not sort of the end state, but it does encourage the best current or really good current practice at a fairly large scale. And we've looked at the current structure of our rezoning policy, and it's important because it impacts over 55% of new high-rise MERB and commercial type buildings here in the city. And really we want to look at restructuring it to focus on the city's priorities, such as greenhouse gases, indoor air quality, health, and water conservation. But we've also understood that there will be other things that we need to, industry to begin showing us and doing. And some of those things include that we, again, in greater detail, will bring forward with a rezoning policy update in the fall if this plan is accepted, but looking at air barrier testing, post-occupancy energy use reporting or benchmarking, improved commissioning of building envelope and mechanical systems, and probably the biggest change is a reporting of embodied emissions. One of the things we've really come to understand is that as we transition successfully towards significant reductions in the operating energy, the importance of starting to address embodied emissions will grow. And what we realize is we don't have a good understanding of that as a city, as most jurisdictions across the world don't either, but we do have some great tools. So what we'll do is start gathering that information so that we can start looking at our programs, policies, incentives to go, what's our effective response? Not just to focus on the operational emissions, but how buildings are constructed and the materials that are selected to ensure that that whole life cycle and supply chain that goes into our buildings are being addressed. I did want to say, while the plan really focuses on achieving zero emissions, the city does have a target of carbon neutral new construction by the year 2020. And I think it's important to distinguish between sort of emissions and carbon neutrality. Carbon neutral is really, you can reduce emissions by reducing demand, you can reduce emissions by using lower carbon intense fuels, or you can just offset. So carbon neutrality does not, you could do it all just by purchasing offsets. And really, this plan lays out a pathway to reduce emissions without the use of offsets by 70% by the year 2020. So a significant way towards achieving carbon neutrality, but in a real way in terms of actual reductions in the buildings themselves and the energy supply that provides and the energy that they use. One of the challenges is by looking into the building code to regulate greenhouse gas intensity specifically, is we don't have the authority to have a greenhouse gas intensity target that's not zero and also have carbon neutrality. Our legal authority in our building bylaw, we can't do both. Either we say the regulation is zero, or i.e. carbon neutral, or we have a non-zero number, which we think is important because we can't make that jump so suddenly to zero. That said, the rezoning policy does provide us with a great tool, and staff are proposing to explore what would be the implications of a carbon neutral requirement in the rezoning policy by 2020, and what would be the mechanisms by which the offsets, how would those be achieved, how would the renewable energy or retrofit of existing buildings be accounted for and would be credited towards meeting that target. So the first part of the plan really is, let's specific, if greenhouse gases is the outcome we want to achieve, let's specifically target that in our policies and our regulations. The rest of the plan really says, this is a rapid transition. We've worked with other stakeholders. We believe it's very possible. Vancouver is uniquely placed in many ways in achieving that, given our mild climate and the fact that our electricity by legislation is got to be 93% renewable already and is currently at 97% renewable blend. But really, we need to start doing this now. We need to start building that capacity in our design community, in our construction and building community, as well as in the supply chain. And so it calls on all city-owned and Vancouver Affordable Housing Agency projects to pursue passive house certification or an alternate zero emissions approach where feasible. And we introduced this idea of alternate zero emissions building approach, recognizing that we have a reasonably good understanding of passive house as a standard and a good approach in limiting emissions from residential buildings, because so much of the energy use is related to space heating. But we have a great diversity of building types that the city builds, and we don't have that same depth of understanding of whether passive house certified is a cost-effective approach to achieve zero emissions. And I think an important part of this plan is, let's learn what's the best approach to take when we need more data. And so, we mention where feasible because there are many barriers. The city is getting into a greater diversity of ownership structures as well as building types, and we'll come back with a more detailed policy within 2 years. Now, the city is just, in the grand scheme of the city, of development in the city, a relatively small player. But we do have private sector leaders that are already striving to build very low emissions and near zero emissions buildings. And so what we want to do is provide tools to work with them to address the risks, the uncertainty, and the increased first uptake costs, so that we can start to understand the most effective approaches. And really it looks at providing catalyst tools. We really like the example we have spent quite a bit of time interacting with staff and politicians from the city of, or the region of Brussels. And what they did was they put forward incentives that's a form of catalyst tool for people to propose high-performing building designs that were cost-effective and attractive and with good neighborhood fit. So they didn't say this is where it will be. They put a challenge before industry. Show us how you could reduce your greenhouse gas emissions and energy use in a reliable way, but do it most cost effectively. And so they saw a lot of experimentation amongst various approaches, and that led them to and enabled them to adopt a requirement for passive house in all residential and hotel construction in the city, effective at the beginning of 2015. And really, the report sort of breaks catalyst tools primarily into two buckets. One is in the detached housing sector, and it recommends an investment of $1.6 million to develop a 3-year zero-emission home program to develop and provide those catalyst tools for early leaders at some volume to develop to the passive house or near passive house levels to help inform future more detailed policy, but again to help the building industry and the supply chains evolve. It does indicate that we have less certainty about the resources and the specific tools that we might want to deploy in terms of catalyzing that in the multi-unit residential and commercial sector. So we'll go back and do further work on that and bring forward recommendations next year if this plan is approved. And it also says that the city engages in sort of, there are a number of special sites that emerge throughout the city. The city has some added influence. Those developers are often looking to establish their development area as being sort of the highest possible quality. So the plan says, let's engage those owners and developers of those special sites and special buildings within the city to look at, is there an opportunity to demonstrate zero or near zero emissions? And the fourth piece, which historically the city has not really focused on, is a real investment in building capacity. Again, as we, as city staff and as private sector leaders begin to pursue that zero emissions, all the answers are not worked out. We don't have it perfect. What's the most cost-effective way? What's the best window system? How do you address this in the different conditions? And so really we want to have an investment in capacity building, and the plan recommends $700,000 in principle, subject to staff securing matching funds to establish a center of excellence to really facilitate where are the knowledge gaps. Let's identify those trends. Let's foster dialogue, builder to builder, architect to architect, building industry to the design industry, regulators to the building industry, to really ensure that what we are learning is available to all and shared with all as broadly as possible. So really, in conclusion, zero emissions new buildings is really the highest priority and the first most significant action towards our objective to have 100% renewable energy in the city by the year 2050. The plan before you really builds off the successes and lessons we've taken in pursuing our Greenest City Action Plan goals to reduce emissions from existing buildings, as well as to strive towards carbon neutral new construction. And it proposes not just a lofty long-range objective, but it has some significant steps before us in the short term. Thank you very much, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pander, for the presentation. And we are going to have questions and speakers tomorrow. As mentioned, we've referred this to tomorrow. So maybe what I'll offer is councillors want to email any questions in advance of tomorrow. We could start tomorrow's speaker session with responses to questions and any further questions, and then hear speakers roll that all into tomorrow's next steps on this report. So thank you very much for the presentation. Appreciate you being here in conjunction with the Greenest City Action Plan update as well. A good tie-in there. And that means we have concluded on the report references today. And we are going to, we'll obviously see this tomorrow at 9:30, Standing Committee on City Finance and Services with speakers. We're going to move on now to hearing the one report that was held for us to discuss further out of the consent agenda package. And that is, let me just pull it up here in front of us. I believe Councillor Reimer, you wished to hold the amendments to health bylaw number 9535 with respect to neonicotinoid pesticide use. Councillor Reimer.
Thanks, Mayor Robertson. A fairly quick question. I know there was intense media interest around adding this to our health bylaw. Could you just give a brief outline what this would do and what impact it would have on somebody wishing to use a neonic that was previously using it, what they couldn't do now?
So the intent of this, this bylaw change is to essentially ban neonics in Vancouver. And it's mostly used as a cosmetic pesticide in Vancouver. It's not used for any agricultural purposes, which is what some of the media was referring to. It's really to deal with chafer beetles. And we already have a really good alternative for chafer beetles, and that's using nematodes. So residents can buy nematodes, they can protect their lawns, or they can even install drought-resistant lawns and other types of grass that will resist chafer beetles as well. So we think this ban has a significant benefit by taking one of the toxins out of our system, improving habitat for bees and other wildlife, but at the same time has very little impact on residents with respect to from a cosmetic point of view. They can still protect their lawns if they need to.
Great. Well, I really appreciate you looking into it, bringing it forward, and really excited to be able to move it and see it added to the class of pesticides that are prohibited for cosmetic use. Thanks.
Okay, Councillor Deal, questions?
Yes, thanks very much. Yeah, just to follow up on something I mentioned in the earlier report, there's certainly a movement we've seen in other places to move away from turf-based lawns to either native grasses or xeriscaping or food production. Are we working at all on any kind of a promotional program, or maybe working with the region on the idea of alternatives to having turf-based front and backyards?
I'm not aware of a comprehensive program that the city is doing. It's possible. I know that we do have conversations through development services. When people are proposing different types of lawns, we'll mention, you know, this type of product will perform better in a drought-resistant product. Of course, we've got the new changes with our urban farming guidelines that allow people to put the farms in place. But I do think that's actually a good opportunity that we can bring up with residents to maybe do more education around what are the alternatives for different types of lawns, and not only from a water conservation point of view, but even from a climate adaptation point of view. How can we absorb more water into the system so it doesn't have to go into the sewer systems?
Exactly.
I'll put that on the to-do list to talk with staff.
Love to see that, and front lawns in particular, backyards, people, I mean, kids might play them and dogs might play them. There are other uses of that, but the front, people rarely use that space. So if we can go to native grasses or like I say, agriculture. I mean, people walk around and pay great amounts of money to aerate their lawns or wear the right kind of shoes on them. You can aerate them, and the beetles are actually doing that. So anyway, I would love to see us move forward with a promotion of alternate uses of that space. So thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Deal. Councillor Carr, questions?
Yeah. Thanks, Mr. Mayor. My question really isn't very much along the same lines as Councillor Deal. I didn't see anything in the report that talked about the promotion, that talked about the public education that's needed, and the timing. How quickly will this be implemented?
Brad, you know, when will we be doing the implementation?
Mayor and Council, Brad Bedell with the Sustainability Group. The bylaw would be enacted on July 26th. We have already adjusted our water sprinkling exemption for nematodes to 3 weeks to give people the proper amount of water to get the nematode treatment in place. So we're certainly gearing up for this shift in lawn care.
Thank you. It was about how are we going to enable people to make this switch. So one question was around the timing, around watering, availability of nematodes. Have we worked with a garden industry?
We met with the BC Landscaping and Nursery Association in preparation for this report, both to inform them and also to get their input on the bylaw change. They were certainly actually quite supportive of this change. They see it as a shift in their business, not a taking away of their business. They felt that the nematode stock, if that's the right word, is certainly out there and available, so that they didn't see a hiccup with this change. And I should also mention that we are bolstering our website so that residents have more information about how to use this treatment. And we're also doing a mail out to the 600 or so landscapers that are registered in the city of Vancouver to make sure that they're aware of it as well.
Perfect. That's exactly what I wanted to hear. And in terms of public education, I can certainly only second Councillor Deal's requests that we provide education around what alternatives there are, whether it's, I mean, not just around if you want to keep your lawn, get nematodes, and this is how, but other alternatives, since there are more zero landscaping, vegetable gardens would be fantastic. Native species, of course, of alternatives to the lawn. So thanks a lot.
Thanks, Councillor Carr. Councillor Ball.
Yes, thank you very much for the report, and I'm delighted to endorse the report. And I was particularly excited to hear just now that you had extended the time period for watering, because having used many nematode services over the last several years on a number of lawns, which are all drought-resistant lawns which act as actually lungs for the city. And I have certainly worked with a number of scientists to be able to have the best kind of lawn that actually does perform that duty for the city. But the issue, I think, was that the nematodes are fiddly. They can only be used in June and July, and sometimes they're dead when you get them, sometimes they're alive. Therefore, I've been working with services who guarantee that they are bringing live ones. But certainly keeping the grass as wet as possible for as long as possible while it gives them a chance to naturally work their way down is critical. And our previous 1 week, 1 hour a day period was simply just not enough to make it happen. So this will be thrilling news, and the more you can get it out there to people that are trying to increase the air quality through their lawns, I think it's very helpful. And I will look forward to letting as many people know as I can, because there are lots of neighborhoods in Vancouver that are unusually, the front lawns are used by children because there are no fences, there's nothing I live in a neighborhood like that where kids run up and down it all day. And so I think it's really important that we don't have poison, but that we do have an alternative that is allowed to function and work. So congratulations. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Ball. And I've got Councillor Reimer back on the queue. Did you prepare to move the motion?
I am very prepared to move the motion. Thank you.
Okay, so the recommendations are moved, and I'll call the question. All those in favor? Do we need to vote on the queue, or can we just do show of hands? We are going to vote on screen. Okay, we have 10 votes all in favor. Unanimous support for the recommendations. Thanks to staff for all the good work on this, and good luck with those next steps and all the outreach in the community, making sure this rolls out successfully. Thanks very much for bringing this forward. And that is our one item that we had held, a report that's now approved. Thanks to Catherine Evans, our Park Board Commissioner, for coming by on this and other matters. And we are on to bylaws. So we've got 5 bylaws on the agenda for consideration by council. Does any member wish to hold any of these bylaws for debate, separate vote, or because of conflict of interest? Seeing none, I'll just check with Councillor Jang first, who is absent from a portion of the public hearing related to bylaw 2 and may vote on the enactment if he confirms he's reviewed the proceedings, which include viewing the related video clip. Councillor Jang, have you reviewed the proceedings? Will you be voting on the bylaw?
Yes, I have reviewed the proceedings and will be voting.
Okay, thank you for that. And I'll ask for someone to move adoption of the bylaws. Councillor Councillor Deal, and seconded by Councillor Louie. And all those in favor of the bylaws? Any opposed? That carries unanimously, and the approved bylaws are listed on the city's website if you want to review them in detail. We have no administrative motions or motions on notice for this meeting, which is a rare event. So we are going to move on to new business, notice of motions and inquiries, other matters. And I've got Councillor Louis first on the queue.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have distributed a notice of motion to the clerk. Just put that up. It's moved by myself and seconded by yourself. This regards to a new seniors facility in South Vancouver, more specifically in the Sunset area. It is a notice of motion, so I will keep it brief and introduce it more formally when we consider it at next council. But essentially, this is to create the opportunity for another senior center in South Vancouver as a result of the east side of Vancouver being severely underserved in terms of seniors facilities, and building on the success of the new Killarney Senior Center, which we were able to leverage $5 million from collectively from the provincial and federal government, that we would replicate hopefully that similar success and building another facility to hopefully bring that imbalance of east side, west side centers into a more appropriate balance. But the first part of this will be to ask staff to undertake some exploratory work related to the capital budget, potential funding sources, including matching funding for provincial, federal government, governance models, and building design and site selection, and have that reported back to us at the earliest opportunity. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Louis. That is on notice for next council meeting, 2 weeks from today. I'll advance to Councillor DiGenova.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I also will start with a notice of motion that I've just sent over to the clerk. Already sent it, and it is entitled "A Slip and Slide Water Party Event in the City of Vancouver in 2017." So I've put that forward to the clerk, and that will be seconded by Councillor Ball. And then I also, Mr. Mayor, just wanted to, under new business and other matters, mention that there was a celebration of life for Keith Jacobson at Killarney Community Centre on Sunday, and it was a very touching tribute to Keith. Many people from the community, I know Councillor Louis was also there, and I just wanted to say that it was a packed house. In fact, some of the recreation staff told me that not only was it were people standing outside the room, but they've never had a bigger turnout for someone. Keith Jacobson, certainly, I'd known him since I was quite young, and he certainly had volunteered for decades. I want to say over 40 years. I know he's been volunteering, Keith, since before we could probably formally count all of the hours that he's put in at Killarney Community Centre, as well as his leadership with others on the Senior Centre in Killarney. So I just wanted to mention that. I know that you, Mr. Mayor, had offered your condolences at our last meeting to him. So it was a very moving service, and a number of people from the community came out to honor Keith. Also, just wanted to speak about an event that I attended on behalf of the city, and that was last month in June, and that was the United Way Avenues of Change for Our Place at Raycam Community Centre. And United Way donated a significant amount of money, $225,000, to Our Place, which strives to make sure that service providers are connected with vulnerable children, and also to increase graduation rates, high school graduation of individuals in that neighborhood. So I just wanted to thank United Way for that donation to the community that certainly will make a difference. And also just mention that I had the opportunity to celebrate Canada Day at a number of places, but one of the biggest turnouts and crowds was at Sunset Community Centre, where they always have a great celebration. I'm sure other councillors were around at other community centres and areas, as many of us were, but those are just some updates of the events that I attended. And again, I just want to offer my condolences to the family and friends of Keith Jacobson. I know that he is very dearly missed and loved, and will be remembered in the community. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor DiGenova. Councillor Affleck is next.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a question for the city manager, or whether you can answer it today or perhaps get back to us. There was a concerning story in business in Vancouver this week regarding the Aquilini development, which is a Rental 100 project, which, according to the story, has found a way to circumvent the Rental 100 program's goal, which is this affordable housing and the restricted rent increases for the first renter by creating fixed-term lease agreements. And I'm wondering if the city manager can address this issue now, or perhaps provide us with information following this to say whether or not this is a way for a development which has received significant relief from not paying DCLs and paying CACs and able to get out of these rental agreements. Thank you.
Yes, thanks, Councillor. Mr. Mayor and Council, my understanding is there was some inaccuracies in the story. It's not a Rental 100 project at all. I'm not sure how that happened. We did reach out to business in Vancouver to let them know of the inaccuracies, and I'm happy to provide a memo to you if that would help in addition to this information. But that's, to the best of my knowledge, that's not an accurate story.
Thank you. In general, though, is it possible that the fixed-term lease agreements could provide developers or the owners of these buildings that are within the Rental 100 program a way to circumvent the rules that we've applied to them, or at least to make it difficult? As we know, the first owner or first renter has the guaranteed rent, but the next one does not, which is a problem I've always had with the Rental 100 program. But I'm worried that in general, if this might be a flaw in the program.
Not to my knowledge, Councillor, but happy to get you a memo with some assessment on that from our housing staff. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Affleck. Councillor Carr?
Yes, thanks, Mr. Mayor. First of all, I just want to say that I met with some people from the South Granville Senior Centre. And they have a lot of concern around a move that's going to be taking place for them because the building that they're in, the church, is redeveloping. So I'm seeking actually a memo from staff on the status of the senior center. There's, as I say, a lot of anxiety around where they're going, when. The facility, I think they've had some conversations with staff, but they're insecure about their future, and I'd appreciate a memo back to council on that. Secondly, I wanted to just bring up some issues that have transpired over the past couple of weeks around Kinder Morgan Trans Mountain Pipeline project. In the last couple of weeks, written comments to Environment and Climate Change Canada's report on the upstream greenhouse gas emissions. The deadline to respond back ended, and I'm wondering, I couldn't find anything on our website. Perhaps we did respond to that report as a city, but I'd like to know if we did, and if we did, could that report be on our website, or maybe direct me to it. Maybe I just can't find it, but I did a search for it. So I'd appreciate that. And I think it's really important because I did read the Environment and Climate Change Canada's report. It's highly, highly disturbing in that basically it dismisses the upstream impacts of the Trans Mountain Pipeline, assuming or with the assumption that expanded oil sands development will occur regardless of whether the pipeline is built, because there's capacity to ship such oil, and if it were to be shipped, that would be probably by rail. There's rail capacity, and that would be worse for greenhouse gas emissions. Basically, it dismisses the need to look at upstream greenhouse gas emissions. So I think it's really important for us to have done due diligence in reading through that report, making comments about it. I'm also very concerned that it states that oil sands production will double by 2040, and that the upstream emissions that it does calculate actually indicates that if you were to attribute the increased capacity of that pipeline to the greenhouse gas emissions associated with that increased capacity would be basically 10 times the entire emissions of the city of Vancouver. Huge cause for concern if we are talking about reducing our own greenhouse gas emissions in the effort to hold climate change to the lesser of evils in the future. So just a heads up on that. And some other things that are associated. There is a review that's online right now, a questionnaire about the Kinder Morgan Pipeline project, and includes what people think or feel about the report that I just mentioned from Environment and Climate Change Canada. So it's online, and I'm wondering if we can kind of encourage people in our network to actually fill in that questionnaire. This is one of the tools, along with public meetings, I'll talk about in a second, one of the tools that the federal government is currently using to assess community response to that pipeline expansion project. I'm happy to provide some information about, the sort, like I can send a link for that questionnaire, but as I say, if we could somehow post it on our website, encourage people to respond, or somehow get it out to our networks, I'd be very appreciative. And thirdly, there are hearings. We know that there is a new federal review panel that includes former local Tsawwassen chief Kim Baird on it. They're holding public meetings. In August, they will be here in Vancouver 16th, 17th, and 18th, and you can sign up to go to those. So again, if we can somehow get that message out to our support base, I think that would be really, really important. And I'm wondering, finally, if there's been any update, or if we have any update from our special envoy, Mr. McGee in Ottawa, on this and all the things that have been that have transpired. Any kind of information about how he's doing in terms of promoting the and focusing on our priorities, which include, of course, this project.
Well, I can't give you an update at the moment right now. He was just recently in Ottawa, last week actually in Ottawa, but check in terms of updating council on that at the next council meeting. Just
appreciate that.
Right in the middle of things with the housing front and with transit, so it's a busy time.
Just to note that this is a priority and it's timely, right? Mm-hmm. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thanks, Councillor Carr. Councillor Reimer.
Thanks, Mayor Robertson. Well, on that last point, as Councillor Carr may remember, the city did launch its own communications effort, both Facebook, Twitter, and a website, and all of this information's there at notworththerisk.vancouver.ca. So definitely being pushed out, but if councillors did want to take time to push people towards that one website so that we can continue to communicate effectively with people in the city who are concerned about the issue, that would be great. The issue of fixed-term leases, I'm glad that Councillor Affleck brought it up, because I did want to let council know that as a result of the erroneous Business in Vancouver story, it did have one positive outcome, well, two. One is that Business in Vancouver has updated the story, so it's quite clear now that no city money went into the project. It was completely a private developer. But contrary to one of Councillor Affleck's points, it's not a flaw in the city's policy, it's a flaw in the provincial government's policy, where the current provincial government made a change, and again, another erroneous point that Councillor Affleck made. If you're a renter, when you sign a lease for a year, at the end of the year, because it's a fixed term lease, the same renter can see a large increase, and that's a change to provincial. The BC Liberals brought that in, and that's what's causing this problem with fixed term leases. Regardless of what kind of building it's in, any renter can be a victim of this, including someone like Councillor Stevenson, who's been in the same unit for quite a while now. I'm not sure how many decades, but a few. But he could suddenly find himself with a very large rent increase as a result of the fixed term lease. So the Renters Advisory Committee, here's the good news. Their interest was piqued by the Business in Vancouver article. We'll be discussing it at their July 20th meeting and intend to bring a motion forward for council's perusal. They are seeking more information from both the BC government standpoint, why they thought it was important to make this change that makes renters on the surface so vulnerable in our city, to better understand that before they bring it forward. So if you had comments on it, it'd be excellent to get them to the Renters Advisory Committee so they could consider that in their deliberations. The other thing, recycling. I did have a question for staff about recycling. It could be because I live on the east side and go to east side grocery stores and spend time on east side transit, but we have had a lot of people's recycling missed. There are many theories in the community about why the pickups are being missed. I think it would be great if we could not only get an answer to council, but also potentially do some kind of outreach work to fix the problem and to provide some clarity about the fact that it's fixed and what factors led to it in the first place, so people have some comfort that it won't happen again.
City Manager.
Sure. Mr. Mayor and Council, thanks for bringing this up, Councillor. There have been a number of missed pickups across the city, and we have certainly heard about it through 311. And there are a few factors that have led to that. In the transition to MMBC for all of the recycling operations, we haven't purchased new trucks for a few years, and so we've been having in our recycling fleet considerable breakage. And so with that fleet being so old, we've been struggling to keep it operating. The transition to MMBC starts October 1st. So we're kind of limping along to get to that point. We have I've just authorized our staff to lease 4 additional trucks to allow for us to have enough trucks in the fleet to continue to limp along till that point. So that was one factor. The other factor was the addition of glass last fall added to our need for volume in the trucks, and so that's taking up additional space in the trucks. So that was the other primary factor. So between those two, we did fall back a little bit. We've, as you might have heard, I've authorized our team to be doing some catch-up work, primarily fixing trucks in the evening and at night, so that the trucks would be ready the following morning rather than them being fixed in the morning and then that crew not being able to get out. So maintenance of the vehicles happening at different times in addition to these additional trucks that I mentioned to you. We've also authorized our crews to be going out over the weekends, so you might have seen we had or heard we had crews out on Sunday. And so we've been authorizing overtime for the crews to be going out and doing that. So there are a number of factors that have led to it, and so I'm now on it on a virtually daily basis, getting the metrics to assess. I believe we'll be fully up to speed this week in terms of all of the routes being covered. The other dynamic is that we drive a route the same way each time. So if the truck doesn't make it through the route or fills up because of the glass, the same people get missed each time, which is another factor that we've just changed. So we're now driving the routes differently so that if you do get missed one week, that you catch up the next week. So kind of an unfortunate confluence of events, but the team's fully on it, and we expect to see this remedied in the next round of pickups here. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Reimer. Councillor Meggs.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I welcome Councillor Carr's request for a memo on this issue of the Anglican Church, the amenity spaces, and I would just like to add some suggestions to the city manager. I also met with the Seniors Center and also consulted with the Anglican Church and the developers selected by that parish for this redevelopment. And I came away quite concerned on a number of fronts. And I think that there's some policy matters raised by this, which I have talked to the housing staff about, and I wouldn't mind seeing illuminated. Basically, the congregation has made a decision as property owners to maximize the value on that site, and their view is that they can't possibly sustain activity in the senior center while that's ongoing, even though the senior center is in the basement of a heritage church, which will get a further upgrade. The second issue, and this is not to criticize anybody, but to point out that this is the second time there's been redevelopment there, and the hall, which would be, I think, taken out in the course of the redevelopment, was part of a 70s or 80s project, or maybe later, which led to the installation of a very successful theater company in the basement, as well as the senior center and the creation of a new church hall. And so what we see here is something which I think is regrettable. It's a group which has never paid property taxes, a faith community now doing a private sector condominium development, which will dislocate and put onto the city the cost of absorbing the community amenity charges for replacing the space that the theater company and the potentially both the theater company and the senior center are now in. Nothing wrong is being done, but it doesn't seem right to me. And so I wonder, especially when faith communities come forward with these redevelopment proposals, if staff are alert enough across various disciplines to say, hey, hang on a minute here. It's one thing if you're filling your parking lot with a development that has housing affordability in it. It's something else if you're building a condominium tower that's dislocating back onto the public sector the amenity charges for the senior center and so on. And while it's possible, and I don't want to provoke Councillor Ball because I know she will tell me how fragile these theater companies are, that they could relocate. A senior center is based on a local population, and relocation of a senior center probably means the end of the senior center. That's a very successful program. So I appreciate that Councillor Carr's raised it. Some work has already been done, but what I think is missing, and I hope if and when we appoint a new director of planning, we get a more consistent approach. We need a single approach across planning and housing to, I think, point out to faith communities that we've had a very high standard set by certain faith communities, the one on Thurlow, which produced social housing and so forth, that we probably have an expectation, certainly that there won't be dislocation of community groups, but that there would be an even higher bar sought while we work with those faith communities to achieve what their objectives are. And, you know, and speaking as someone who is baptized in Anglican but haven't practiced for quite a while, I would say there's no obligation on the part of the taxpayers to provide a huge lift like that for a faith community without payback. You know, it's a sensitive matter, but I appreciate that it was raised. I would welcome some further sort of strategic thinking in this memo rather than just an update on the plight of the senior center, which is real, and it's not clear at the moment that there's any thinking on the part of the developer to mitigate that impact.
Thanks, Councillor Meggs. Councillor Louie.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just to rise and give a council update to the number of activities that I've undertaken since last council meeting. First and foremost, though, I do want to just say a couple words that I also attended the service for Keith Jacobson, and it was my extreme honor to speak on behalf of myself and the wider community and to thank Keith for his service to our city. It was widely attended. Many of his former workers, predominantly pressmen, although there were a few mailers in the audience as well, came and this was a sign of his long service, not just to the community, but to his working life as a long-standing union member and fighting for workers' rights in our city. Of course, many Canada Day events, and Councillor Reimer attended many with myself. There was an East Village opening this past weekend. Despite the rain, a good turnout. A Thai festival opening. The first international watercolor biennale that Councillor Ball and I attended together. That was a nice addition. Councillor Jang, although he's not here, and I attended the Kongjiao Association event along with the Yusan Chidak fundraiser for St. Paul's Hospital, which was an interesting opportunity to mesh opera with the Chinese community and fundraising for our new hospital in our city. Had the opportunity to meet an MP Richard Wynne from Australia, who came looking at our city specifically, he's the Minister of Planning, and he was very impressed with what we've been able to accomplish. Coupled with our Greenest City initiatives and our entire movement towards being a more sustainable city overall. Very complimentary, of course, with what he had to say with us and wanting to learn from our initiatives here in the city of Vancouver. And that was, it's always nice to hear external validators for the work that we do at the city, especially from, so far afield. Had the opportunity to also go to the Carnaval del Sol, where provided open comments, but also played in the City of Vancouver / Latin Consuls soccer game. I'm happy to report that we won 4-3. Unfortunately, I had my goal called back. I was in the crease apparently, unfortunately, but we still somehow found a way to win the game, and so I'm pleased to report that. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor Louie. Councillor Carr.
Thanks. Thank you. I just wanted to rise again, Mr. Mayor, just to comment on the statement that was raised by Councillor Reimer around the website, notworththerisk.vancouver.ca. Of course, I know about that website. The problem is that that website doesn't contain any of the information that I just talked about. So if that's the right place for it, fine. But the most important thing is really public access. And if the citizens don't know Not Worth the Risk is the name of our campaign around this, they're not directed from other logical places on our website to get there. So there's a Kinder Morgan section on our website. Maybe there should be a nice little highlighted section like direct you to Not Worth the Risk. And I just want to reiterate something that I mentioned when I stood before in this council chamber on Not Worth the Risk. Our influence has to be on the cabinet as a whole. And I filled out the, send a message to your MP section, and not all the cabinet members in Vancouver are highlighted on that. We should send a message to every one of them, well, two that are there, because that's who's going to be voting on this in the fall. So I'm just looking forward to something that's a little easier for people to navigate and a more clear focus on who we need to influence in terms of the upcoming vote on the Kinder Morgan project.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Carr. Councillor Brawl, you have more?
Yes, thank you. Perhaps we could reset me to 0 as I haven't spoken yet.
Okay.
Thank you so much. I was really pleased that Councillor Carr brought up the issue of the South Granville Senior Centre, and also I'm happy to respond to Councillor Meig's remarks, because indeed I worked there for 30 years. And I had a theatre company which operated there and literally brought in thousands of children to work in the only clear span space, gym that existed for the public on the west side of Vancouver. And that gym was indeed hugely used by not only Carousel Theatre, but other theatre companies that we rented it to, and as well as other schools that we used and rented the space for. So I know the value of those spaces. I was thrilled when the Senior Centre became one of the social programs that we needed to happen there, and thrilled when another theatre company was actually able to make a home in the basement and in the remainder of space that was all that was left when the beautiful clear span gym was demolished and destroyed, which I can tell you from many, many years in working in theatre and working with arts organizations, replacing any space is not a simple procedure. It is a huge and difficult operation, only made possible in many ways by the capital infrastructure grants of the city, which can lever funds from all other agencies. But it is not an overnight situation. And were that theatre to lose that space, they would find it enormously destructive, both financially and in terms of their audience finding them again. So I do want to make it really clear that anytime an elephant rolls over, whether it is in a church or in any other space, it can crush the very, very lifeblood of a building and the lifeblood of our city as we provide those very needed amenities, both social and cultural, here in the city. So I would encourage us to all look at the situation there, try to be as helpful as possible, and not diminish the needs of any one organization against another, because I think they're all critical, all important, and I know that we as a city have worked extraordinarily hard to try to build up our cultural infrastructure. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Ball. And Councillor Deal.
I was going to try to resist the urge to do a shopping list, but I'll do a couple of highlights since there have been so many other excellent ones this morning. Since the last meeting, a few of the things that I've had the honor to attend were the signing of the Charter for Inclusive Communities done by the National Council of Canadian Muslims in an effort to combat Islamophobia. The groundbreaking for the Cohere Housing Project in the Commercial Drive area, sponsored by the Grandview Calvary Baptist Church, who donated the land that their parking lot is on for a fabulous, fabulous community called Cohere. And I won't go into the details here, but I encourage everyone to support their efforts and find out more about that project. The Vancouver Public Library had an Author Appreciation Day where we honored some authors. And then on a personal side, I spent a few days up in Powell River at an event called Cathalamu, which is an international choral event. And there were over 1,000 choir singers from around the world there. And there were shootings going on while we were up there, and some of the choirs were from places like South Africa and from Atlanta. And we had some significant time together as a group of 1,000 people from around the world with a common love of music, talking about the strength of and power of music to bring people together and acknowledging and grieving over some of the events that have been taking place. So I want to acknowledge those events, acknowledge the losses that have been incurred, the anger behind them, and also how encouraging it was for me at a personal level to see these people, especially the youth choirs coming together and saying that they felt that working together as youth was the solution to some of these problems we're seeing. So it was a very moving and very exciting time to be working together and using music as a tool for peace. Thank you. Oh, actually, and also Canada Day, had the great honor of swearing in 60 new Canadians at Canada Place from 26 different countries. Another very, very moving ceremony. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Councillor Deal. And that's all for the new business, notice of motions and inquiries. We just need a motion to adjourn this council meeting. Councillor Louis and a seconder. Councillor Jang seconds. All those in favor of adjournment? Any opposed? That carries. This council meeting is adjourned, and we will shift to in camera.